people of Earth, it's Bright Garlic here. Welcome to Shortcuts number 17, Personal Difficulties in Dealing with ET Experiences and Relationships. It's Tuesday the 2nd of April 2024. It's a fine and dandy day outside, nice and cloudy. We've had plenty of rain overnight and the autumnal change is finally here. The budgies are also going ballistic on the front veranda, so you'll have to endure them. So many people talk about the ET subject, their experiences or relationships, without ever mentioning personal difficulties they have with it or as a result of it. They are either afraid of acknowledging it or afraid of dealing with it or afraid of opening up and sharing it with other people. Perhaps they're afraid of being judged. Perhaps they're afraid that some image they've established about themselves will be tarnished. Or perhaps they're afraid that certain things they've said will be undermined or contradicted. Perhaps they have an unaware ego that can't allow itself to be seen with some psychological weakness that it can't control. Perhaps they don't want people to see that they live with uncertainty, an uncertainty that they don't like. Or perhaps they don't want people to see that their experiences are beyond their understanding or their control, and that unsettles them. The nature of contact and experiences and relationships with ETs is such that it is highly unpredictable, highly uncertain, ambiguous, difficult to make sense of, confronting, confusing, so far beyond the experiences of normal life that it can be difficult to understand or to integrate, and it has the capacity to completely shatter your view of the self and of reality itself. Such experiences, while sometimes traumatic and capable of causing psychic disturbances, are capable of disrupting the normal experience of life so much that it can bring many aspects of one's existence into question, creating a seemingly endless stream of questions that sometimes have no answers. Without quality self-reflection and deep investigation of the nature of the mind and the self, ET experiences can create a host of ambiguities, uncertainties, problems without solutions, misunderstandings, false beliefs, different forms of ignorance and fear. I myself have had many difficulties dealing with my own experiences, and I've tried to talk about this extensively on the blog, perhaps not to the extent that I would have liked, but I have talked about certain subjects such as doubt. And these are difficulties that span, I guess you'd say, a continuum from the very positive to the very negative. Among the very positive difficulties are the craving for ongoing contact, and I think anybody who's having these experiences will understand that. The craving to be among spiritually aware beings, the desire for more unusual experiences, the growing of insight and understanding, being forced to question everything, especially myself. ETs not turning up when I want them to, being forced to grow mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I think of each of these as positive difficulties because they're difficult to deal with at the time, but eventually they have positive outcomes. Among the very negative difficulties are the sense of isolation, the sense of sometimes feeling like I'm losing touch with consensus reality, the sense of being forced to determine what is real and what is not, having to let go of my secure beliefs, having to live with uncertainty and not having answers to everything, sometimes feeling anger for being given more ambiguity, uncertainty, lack of clarity, and I guess you'd say unbelievable experiences. and worst of all, being consumed with doubt. I think of each of these as negative difficulties because they are difficult to deal with at the time, and most of them have negative outcomes. But whether positive or negative outcomes, eventually everything in the long run creates some sort of positive outcome, leading to some form of mental, emotional, behavioral, relational, or spiritual growth. I said that the worst of these difficulties is doubt. So I want to speak about this subject because it's the one subject that's most neglected and shunned and ignored by people interested in talking about this subject. I think part of the reason that it's cast aside is because when you talk about ETs and UFOs, you're trying to establish a kind of credibility, kind of belief in people's minds. So you tell a story, you give an opinion, you try to provide some insight and understanding, and you'd like to imagine that people will walk away accepting or believing what you've said. Now, the minute you talk about doubt, for example, I had doubts about whether this or that really happened, you plant a seed of doubt in others' minds, and that works against any belief you may have established in their mind. So belief and doubt are in this antagonistic relationship, and if you talk to one, you tend to ignore the other, so as not to bring the other into play. But we are human beings, not algorithmic machines, not biocomputers. We are complex and constantly assimilating new information. Everything is in flux. We're constantly assimilating new experiences and in the habit of being confused and uncertain and holding polar opposites. So typical in someone who's being honest, belief and doubt go hand in hand. So in my life, belief and doubt have been engaged in a dynamic tango, and sometimes that tango leans in favor of belief and sometimes it leans in favor of doubt. Technically, I guess you'd say the opposite of doubt is trust, but belief and trust are close bedfellows. You have to trust something is true to believe in it. The semantics might not be quite right, but I think you might understand what I mean. Now, in my own case, it's a tango, but it's also like a seesaw. When information is weighed up correctly, it leans in favor of belief or doubt. But in the case of the ET experience, the information you require isn't always available. So you can't always stack the seesaw accurately, so it's easy to come down on the wrong side. So in my case, what is there to be doubtful about? Well, I could say everything if I was being a doubting Thomas and a hardcore cynic. But in terms of the things that I have had doubt about, I'd suggest the following list. Whether a particular face-to-face experience occurred, whether what I and another person experienced really happened, whether the conversation I just had with an ET, whether that ET is X, Y, or Z, whichever ET it was, really happened, whether a strange synchronicity related to an ET experience was really a synchronicity and not just a chance or random event, whether I really spent time on other worlds or on board a craft, whether my memories of an event are accurate, whether my internal world contacts are just products of my imagination or whether they're real, whether certain things I believe about the subject are wrong. Now, I'm someone who's been afflicted by doubt for much of my life, from about the age of 10 onwards. My doubt was worse between the ages of 25 to 40, but it's flared up at different periods in many different areas of my life. Early on, it was associated with a lack of confidence in dealing with the effects of chronic abuse in my adolescence. Later, it was associated with perhaps having too much awareness of the human mind and what it is capable of. Bear in mind, I worked with a lot of people who were mentally ill, emotionally ill, and I was a Buddhist for 15 years, and I taught mindfulness meditation for 17 years. So I was acutely aware of the frailty of the human mind. It was also associated with an ability to access different aspects of the mind that came out of my studies of subpersonalities, Buddhism, and a long series of experiments. So I was aware of how the mind can create all kinds of manifestations. It was also associated with having a vivid imagination, teaching imagination skills, and being a writer, which made me hyperconscious of how easy it is to conjure something from the imagination. And finally, it was associated with looking at experiences of people across a broad range of fields, including the ET UFO subject, and learning about, I suppose you'd say, lots of crackpots who never seem to have expressed an ounce of self-doubt and wondering about themselves in terms of self-reflection. And if it could happen to them, then it could happen to anyone else. Could I be just as foolish and deluded as they were? So let me give you a couple of examples to help you understand this doubt. So here's the first example. Sometimes my doubt would come when I least expected it. I would have some or other anomalous experience, such as a time distortion, that is a time contraction or time dilation, lost or gained time, or what felt like relived a time. I'd already been through similar things, and then I would get stuck after an experience, trying to rationalize it away and find ways that I had to be wrong. Sometimes I had a clear awareness through an entire experience, or memories would come back later by themselves, or I'd recall the memories after retracing the event and trying to remember what happened. And despite the presence of some event, complete with a whole sequence of happenings, and sometimes with the presence of another person, I'd rationalize it all away or say there wasn't any evidence. So I was playing the role of the hardcore skeptic. So example number 2. In the experiences that began in 2019 visiting NLCI 35, some of those, most of those involve being returned at the exact moment I left. Now, when there's no interruption to your perception of reality, and none of the evidence you recorded whilst away comes back with you, it's very easy to doubt what's real. And let me just make a note here. I recorded a damn lot of evidence. I always do when I go away. Written evidence, audio evidence, video evidence. It's all there. It's all kept on NLCI 35. This is something I inherently do, and I also record my life when I'm over there, and not just me, the house intelligence does that. So none of that comes back. So I've been making these trips every fortnight this year. Every time I go away, it feels as if nothing happens, except that I'm immediately told how long I was away, and memories begin coming back later in the day. I now have so many memories that I've had to catalogue them and try to summarize each trip with some of the more significant memories. Every week I sit down and try and have numerous sessions going back through the memories. I have absolutely no hope of remembering everything because I don't have enough life left to remember everything that has occurred. So here I have all these memories and only a handful of time anomalies and no other evidence. I always get a strong, painful sensation in the middle of my forehead when the event happens, and sometimes tones in my ear. Now, sometimes these pains will be brief, sometimes they'll last maybe 30 minutes. They often come after the event when I'm immediately returned. Sometimes they precede the event and continue. My ex-wife has monitored me during such events, and on one occasion she watched a purple-pink haze develop at the point I was taken, and has seen me disappear in the lounge room at a time when I remembered actually being there. At that stage I wasn't convinced anything happened. She said, "You weren't there, you were gone." So it's very confronting, very hard to sit with. I organise the trips, I go and I do what I'm told, and it's as if nothing happens. I'm told how long it was, how long I was away, then memories begin to return spontaneously later on. I also try to recover more memories, then I reflect on what I've remembered, any lessons I've learned. More recently, I began a series of experiments with Dude that will last for a year to help me put aside my doubt. I did the same thing after the first few years of talking to him because I wanted to be sure it was all real. Now, from those experiments of trying to determine whether or not our conversations were what they appeared to be, whether they were real, I discovered a couple of things. Conversations were prone to distortions if I was exhausted or emotionally stressed, but not always. I also discovered that sometimes certain predictions happened and sometimes they didn't. I learned to accept that sometimes they didn't because I let my mind drift and fill in the gaps, and sometimes events took place in a different space, another conjoined space, where things turned out differently and I had no way of being able to figure that out. I also discovered the nature of the conversations, i.e. their fluency, ease, quality, varied according to how I was feeling mentally, emotionally, and physically, also according to the time of the day, night, and the subject matter. So rather than kill my doubt entirely, the experiments reinforce that sometimes I make mistakes, and that only reinforced the doubt when I was feeling mentally, emotionally, and physically drained. The experiments that helped me most to believe my conversations were real were when things were taken, and sometimes things were taken or given or retrieved from other places or times. And I can give you some examples. I lost a glove 300 kilometers away, 250 kilometers away, and a few days later that glove was returned. I searched everywhere for that glove. I lost it in a hospital car park. It was returned. I had another set of objects that were taken from, I won't say who, but somebody's childhood in the 1980s and brought here, given to me. I had no way of getting these particular objects. One was very fragile. It was a 4-leaf clover. The other was a small statue. I had no way of getting anything like this. So they were very convincing. But despite being unable to account for them in any rational way, I was still sometimes doubtful. So if I was not careful, doubt would become a corrosive force that spread into other areas of my life, like my ability to heal from my tumours, which some of you know, will recall I've had for 17 years, my ability to see the best in humanity, that is, to see humanity get past our problems, like the loss of global biodiversity. So there are all of these areas in my life in which doubt would begin to circulate if I was not careful. So I've had this dangerous tango with doubt where sometimes doubt took me into places I did not want to go, and began to affect other things in my life. And more recently, in the last few years, I've been able to lure that tango back into I guess you'd say, a healthier place where the doubt didn't overwhelm me or contaminate other aspects of my life. In the last 20 years, the doubt has never been about confidence like it was when I was younger. It's only ever been about understanding and believing what's real. Today, I recognize the doubt as merely an aspect of the self, another voice that wants to be heard, and by hearing it, I can use it as a means of critically exploring the nuances of an experience. And I guess I should add here that maybe there are three experiences here in which there are nuances. There are the events themselves, there is the immediate memory of the events, and then there is the longer period of reflection on the events and trying to understand the events. So three distinct sets of experience. And each of them, I guess, has the capacity for doubt and can be useful in helping to explore each of those experiences. But I have to be careful, like the reformed alcoholic who knows that one drink can trip them over the edge and start them drinking again. I have to recognize when doubt arises and try to recognize and understand the conditions and the triggers that arouse it so that I don't make the mistake of letting it hijack me and becoming a corrosive force that pervades, if you like, the whole of my life. That is a vulnerability that I have to constantly keep in check. By recognizing that doubt is a form of reactivity, that is a reaction to a situation at the time or any time later, and by recognizing that it's a voice that needs to be heard, I'm able to accept doubt and work with its presence. I originally trained as a scientist, and I have a very logical mind. Doubt, for me, is an ally of those two things, but sometimes you have to acknowledge and recognize that experiences and relationships with ETs don't always follow the logical ways of working of the ordinary reality we experience in our day-to-day lives, in much the same way that dreams have their own ways of working, following a logic that is beyond that of ordinary reality, and certainly of conscious reality. And sometimes that's worth unpacking in order to avoid being overcome by doubt. So when you unpack it, what you see is something like this. When I say unpack it, what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the ET experience, period. So it looks something like this. It's often non-linear in appearances or in memory. It fucks with time and hence with memory. It sometimes appears to be coming from spaces beyond this space, be they intradimensional or interdimensional spaces, or even conjoint spaces. Things often seem impossible and like magic, beyond explanation. It sometimes appears that certain phenomena like predictions play out in conjoined spaces, spaces in which other yous exist but not this current you, for which you have no conscious awareness. Entities have a more complete understanding of the nature of the self and can communicate from multiple levels of being, not just as localized bodies. What seems non-linear or illogical from one perspective in time can, with the fullness of time, appear linear and to have been logical in how it played out and unfolded. We are surrounded by spaces that are rich with life. Thus, seeing has little to do with believing. And finally, that there is but one that can manifest in any way that it wants. So these are just a few of the things we can unpack from our interactions with ETs and from the ET experience. There are many more things, many of which are hard to articulate, as anybody who's had these experiences will know. But any one of these things has the capacity to arouse and feed our doubt and turn it into a pathological monster that then begins to consume other aspects of our life. I've learned that doubt can be an ally and a nemesis, a force for understanding and a force for undermining. I wish I had less doubt, but to have no doubt at all, as many people appear to have in relation to things as varied as ETs, fairies, human time travel, reptilians, archons, and a host of other, what to me is outlandish things, is to throw oneself into the fire of self-delusion, where every fantasy becomes a reality and anything is possible. That to me is a place occupied by madness, never to doubt or to question, but to take on a popular belief and never pause and reflect and critique and pull it apart and try to understand it logically or illogically. I'm reminded of the difference between the schizophrenic and the mystic that Joseph Campbell brought into the spotlight when he said, "The schizophrenic is drowning in the same waters in which the mystic swims with delight." Putting aside the notion that schizophrenia is a socially engineered disorder and that there are other pathologies that they've created out of the human condition, the point of this quote is that there is a critical difference in understanding between the schizophrenic and the mystic. Maybe sometimes the schizophrenic is a mystic, and maybe sometimes the mystic is a schizophrenic. Picture a Venn diagram where it overlaps. The point being that one has insight and the other does not. Or take the comment by prominent anti-psychiatry pioneer Thomas Saz. If you talk to God, you are praying. If God talks to you, you have schizophrenia. If the dead talk to you, you are a spiritualist. If you talk to the dead, you are a schizophrenic. Sometimes it's just a question of definitions. What is a madman? What is a mystic? And so on. What I am saying is that it is a madness to take anything out of the ordinary in our own experiences or others' experiences at face value. We ought to question things before we commit to believing them. And that's true for anything that I might say. That's where doubt is helpful. But we have to put reins on our doubt, otherwise it will negate everything and turn us into hardcore skeptics, and there will be nothing we can hold to be true or believe actually exists or took place in our experiences. One of the things that the right amount of doubt can do is that it can bring coherence to understanding. But too much doubt puts you in the same place as the madman who attaches himself to believing he is Lord Krishna or Jesus Christ. It creates a false sense of coherence, along with some, I guess you'd say, ready-made support myth. Excess doubt makes you a hardened skeptic who is happy to believe seeing is believing and that everything must be logical because the cosmos is entirely logical to the human mind, which of course it isn't. In my own experience, the right amount of doubt takes you beyond the gullible belief systems that make perfect sense of the world and empower many people with a sense of mission, such as those of the schizophrenic, and beyond the egotistic trap of the super skeptic who doubts everything and places us somewhere where we can both remain open to unknown possibilities and guarded against false belief. But in the Venn diagram of belief and doubt, it is a small area of overlap where the truth resides and where we're healthiest. I've straddled both sides of the Venn diagram, from clear, unflinching belief to super skeptical, cynical doubt, and I've found that it takes time and a deep honesty and a willingness to look inwards at the entirety of how I function in order to reach the middle ground. So that's my experience with some of the difficulties with the ET experience, particularly with doubt. I'm sure that if we were to look at this more deeply, there are some universal kind of difficulties that we all struggle with, and I'd love to see more research happening into this particular area. I'd certainly like to hear from people if they've had similar experiences, particularly with the experience of doubt. And I think if we're honest, we need to really unpack this whole area of the human condition side of the human experience with the other, with ETs, in order to understand what's really happening, because so many things that we attribute to ETs and to the cosmos are actually things that are part of us. And if we don't look honestly at that, we will never understand what we are and what they are. Now, at the same time, we all have experiences every single day. Most of them are easy to process, but some of them are difficult. Some of them are even traumatic. And in order for us to be able to fully process the experiences of being with ETs, of encountering the other, of encountering the anomalous, we need to understand the human condition more fully. And that includes the difficulties that we have in not only processing these experiences, but actually being with them at the time. And if we can do that, then I think that we can be far more present to ETs and ET contacts and relationships when they happen. We can open ourselves up to the anomalous and say, I don't know, here I am prepared to be my honest, full self in this experience, and then have a far deeper experience as a result. So thank you very much for listening to me today and for getting this far. I wish you all a wonderful day of human life. Cowabunga, people of Earth, I am bright garlic. Saying arrivederci.